Welcome back to another episode. This week we're going back. We're going back to one of my personal favorite civilizations ever, ancient Greece. The birthplace of philosophy, drama, history, the Olympic Games, and of course democracy, ancient Greece literally has it all. In under 10 minutes, I will teach you everything that you need to know about ancient Greece, whether you're studying for a test, you're just curious about the subject, or you just want to impress your friends. Not only will you know the subject, but you'll also be able to understand it, and you'll have so much fun learning it. I hope that you're ready. Welcome to Vlogs of Knowledge. Ancient Greece is really responsible for a large part of our Western culture. Like a lot of the things that we have today come from ancient Greece. Things like philosophy, mathematics, and history, all of those things have roots in ancient Greece, and historians they classify it as one of the most influential civilizations. Now of course, there's a lot of history to talk about, way too much for just a very short and simple video that I want to do. I'm always trying to make this as simple and as easy to understand for all of you guys. So because of that, we're just going to spend some time looking at a brief overview of ancient Greece and touching on some important points. But as always, let's put all this in historical context and get some background. And yes, this time there's some actual background to look at, and it will be important for this video. So Greece, if you didn't know, is a peninsula located in southeastern Europe. It's comprised of the mainland and a few islands that are around it. Now over the years, because of its geographical position, ancient Greece was involved in a lot of wars, conquests, and invasions. And because it's also on the sea, naval battles were very common. People have been in that territory ever since the Neolithic age. Like that's really a long time ago. Usually what you have is you have some sort of civilization that comes in, they stay there for a few hundred years, then another civilization comes in and takes over, and so on. And this went on until about the 10th century BC, where Greece kind of just stopped. They stopped being culturally significant, they just stopped improving. It's what we call the Greek Dark Ages. They're called that way because for those 300 years, we don't really have that much written documentation. We don't really know what happened, what they did, what they created, what they did. We just don't know anything. But after those 300 years, Greece emerged into what we call the Archaic Period. And that period is really, whenever we're talking about ancient Greece in any way, we're usually referring to the Archaic Period, or at least the classical period that came right after it. It's where like all of the big stuff happened. The Archaic Period is classified by the introduction of republics instead of monarchies. Basically, people were not happy with the monarch, they weren't happy that one person was ruling everything, which should really not surprise you considering the fact that that's all we talked about in last week's episode. They wanted something else, something different that would give the people a lot more control over any sort of political decision that was being made, and really just having a king wasn't going to cut it. Like the king could control to do whatever he wanted. They wanted something else. During that time, people lived in small villages scattered throughout the territory, but as time went on, these villages became towns and the towns eventually became cities. The Greeks called them polis, and with that came a new sort of political system, the city-state. Each city-state was essentially a big city with its own set of laws, customs, and culture. There was no one Greek ruler to rule them all. Each city-state had pretty much full independence. The best example for this is Athens and Sparta. Both part of Greece, both have different laws, different cultures, and even have different armies. And while I won't talk too much about mythology in this episode, it is important to know that eventually each city-state became associated with its own Greek god. For example, Athens was linked with Athena, Sparta with Apollo, and so on. And don't worry about the mythology, I'm keeping all of it for a separate different episode. I haven't forgotten, I plan to make a really big episode on mythology one day. This new city-level political system is what eventually gave rise to democracy. Basically, the people, they weren't happy with the monarch and they wanted to have more control. They wanted to have a say in the matter. Each city-state would hold elections in which the people could vote on important political decisions that would affect their lives. In fact, the word democracy comes from Greek and literally means the power of the people. While all city-states were technically part of Greece, they shared the same territory, the same gods, and the same culture, they were very distinct from one another. They had full independence and really acted like their own sub-country. In fact, the differences were so big that they warranted multiple civil wars. Moving on from politics, let's jump briefly into philosophy. And I say briefly because philosophy is really something that you don't have to talk about when talking about ancient Greece, because really ancient Greece was the center of philosophy at the time, and everybody knows that. I mean, when you have Plato and Aristotle to your name, it's kind of inevitable, right? But I mean, the philosophy is important, but it'll be more important later on in this video. Plato and Aristotle both started their own schools of thought that were to influence philosophy for millennia to come. Like I studied philosophy in school, I studied Aristotle and Plato in school. And it's important to know and to understand how this philosophy went from being centered to Greece to eventually reaching the Western world, and pretty much everybody, like everybody I know knows about Plato and Aristotle. And by the way, this is a very simple history lesson on ancient Greece. If you want to learn more, maybe about details or names or dates, I do strongly encourage you to go out and research on your own. It's actually why I make these videos so simple. I purposely don't give out all of the information because I want to get you guys interested in a subject, and then you might go out and research and learn a thing or two. And if you want to do that, there's some links in the description where you can start. Now let's move on to Greek art. From huge buildings, monuments, temples, to really detailed and intricate sculptures, to even vase painting, ancient Greece literally seems once again to have it all. It is one of the most artistic civilizations, and we're very lucky to have a lot of its art left for us to enjoy and analyze, and really try to understand who they were as a civilization. The Greeks, they loved to build, and one of the things that they really liked to build was to build large temples for their gods. And considering the fact that they had so many gods to choose from, you can be sure that they built a lot of temples. Things like the Parthenon, the Temple of Zeus, the Temple of Artemis, these things were huge, especially considering the fact that they were built around the year 6, 7, 800 BC. These monuments were very impressive for the people of the time. I mean, it makes sense, right? Just imagine you being there in ancient Greece walking, and you see this huge temple that's like 10, 20 meters tall. Like, you would be pretty impressed. I would be impressed. I'm impressed today. Just imagine how impressed I would be if the year was 800 BC. Like, forget it. Like, these things were huge. Not only were they huge, but they were also very well thought out. Like, everything was placed strategically to assure that it wasn't going to break in like 100 years and that it would stand strong with the test of time. I mean, it's why today we still have a lot of these temples pretty much intact. Like, as long as we protected them, they remained pretty much intact and they stood the test of time. Like, sure, they were built for art, but they were also built strategically. Now, besides building massive temples, the Greeks were also very good at very fine detail, and that detail really shows in their sculptures. Like, looking at these sculptures, you can kind of tell what the artist was thinking when he was making them, why he made his decisions, and really you get sort of an insight as to how he thought and how the culture was at the time and really what influenced them. I actually took a class on this, and it's really interesting to look at the way these temples and sculptures evolved over time. Like, it's really interesting to look at the changes. In a very weird way, they're kind of telling the story of ancient Greece through art. Like, you get to see the changes, the evolutions, and the different influences. Like, it's something I never thought I would be interested in, but it's very interesting to look at this evolution. Trust me, if you have time, go look it up. Now, I said culture and daily life a lot in this video, but I haven't really talked about it. Like, what was really culture like? The Greeks, as we've seen, were very active people. They didn't sit around too much. They actually went on and they did stuff. They were artistic, they were big thinkers, and they were fit. And with that, one has to ask a few questions. Like, what was their culture like? What was their daily life like? Like, just what did they do? Well, Greece is a sunny place. The sun shines on most days, which makes people want to go out and actually do stuff. Not like Canada, where you have rain, cold, and snow every single day, and you just really want to stay inside and not look outside. Like, in Greece, you actually had stuff to do. Generally, most people lived by farming, fishing, and trade, but others were soldiers, scholars, artists, and scientists. Like, as a Greek, you had a lot of opportunities as to what you could do with your life. Men were in charge of a lot of things, and they had a lot of power. They could vote, they were the ones who would go out and earn income for the family, and they could also join the army. Although most men were poor and they had to spend the majority of their time on the farm growing and harvesting the crops. Women, on the other hand, did not have that much freedom, unfortunately. They mainly stayed at home, they took care of domestic things like raising the kids, cooking, and cleaning. In some cases, they weren't even allowed to leave the house without the husband's permission, which to me is kind of really out of my reality, but at the same time I can understand because this was like the year 800 BC, they hadn't evolved past the point of sexism and things of that nature. Interestingly enough, Greek fashion was very simple, which is very surprising coming from such a culturally dense civilization. They walked barefoot, they wore these white tunics, which is really what you see when you're looking at pictures of ancient Greece, is that white tunic, and the slaves, they wore, well, literally whatever they could find. Like, it's a very interesting contrast compared to what we've seen before. So that was a brief overview of ancient Greece, but in the beginning of this video, I said that ancient Greece had a huge impact on our culture. And that's the final point that I want to touch on in this video. It's perhaps the most important part of the video because it really brings everything together and shows us how our world is dependent and really influenced by the Greeks. So far, we've established that the Greeks were very active culturally. They had a lot of things going on. So naturally, if ancient Greece was to somehow expand and become an empire, you should expect that a lot of that culture would follow with it. I'm sure you've all heard of Alexander the Great. He's a very popular guy. In the short 33 years that he lived, he took Greece and really made an empire out of it. Seeking revenge from the Persian invasions about a century earlier, he went on, he invaded the Persian territory and even went as far as India with his army. He brought with him all the culture of ancient Greece, and because he was such a good general, he treated the people that he captured very nicely. They took that culture and they fused it with their own. And because the empire got so big, that culture was literally spread out everywhere. Like, for example, it's why the Romans were so similar to the Greeks, because they were very close to the Greeks, and when the Greeks came and took that territory, they brought their culture with it. It's why we have democracy, we took it from the Greeks. It's why we also have philosophy, we also took it from the Greeks, and it's why we have mathematics. Greek influence is everywhere. Like, if you really look into it and try to trace back a lot of these things, you'll often end up in ancient Greece. This is a process called Hellenization, and it's really much more important and so much bigger than I made it out to be. Because this is a short video, I don't have time to really cover it all. But if you're interested, and I really think that you should be because this is such an important topic, remember that there are some links in the description where you can start your research. So that was a brief history lesson on ancient Greece. I really hope that I was able to give you some sort of understanding as to what ancient Greece was all about. So now go out and impress your friends. And if you enjoyed the video, please leave it a big thumbs up, share it to a friend, and also do click that subscribe button because it really does help me out a lot and it shows me that you enjoy my content. My name has been Darius Cosden. You can follow me on social media. The links will be in the description. And also make sure to check out my second channel where you get to see behind the scenes of everything that I do on this channel. It's good stuff. With that being said, it's been an absolute pleasure and I will see you all next week.